Also in the report, another former Trump staffer found out in advance that there would be a call to action to march to the Capitol and, as he put it, make noise. This was at a time when Trump's team was telling the authorities the exact opposite. The crowd would be at the ellipse only. So the report states that staffer's text is the earliest indication they found. Let me repeat. You're looking at a really important page from this report. That text I just read you is the earliest indication that Donald Trump did plan to wage his supporters in a call to arms to march on the Capitol. Now, that's incriminating. Remember, if all you want to do is hold a rally or a protest, you could do it any number of places in Washington. And when you pick a place like the Ellipse and make that the place and do the security for that, well, you put all your chips down there. When you have a secret plan to go to the Capitol, any prosecutor looks at that and says, if you were just going to gather outside peacefully, why keep it a secret? You could have publicized that for weeks. Make sure everybody knows where they're going. No, it is incriminating. And then you add the other evidence in the report. The FBI found an online post that said it's not a rally. It's a final stand with people ready to die. Don't be surprised if we take the Capitol building. You'll note the document is not fully released because of security concerns. These are pieces of evidence that can help prosecutors prove intent, which is a required element for every crime that Congressman Raskin cited in that referral.
The fourth and final statute, anyone who incites, assists, or engages in insurrection against the United States of America, and anyone who gives aid or comfort to an insurrection.
Aid or comfort to an insurrection. Translation: you don't have to necessarily prove that someone was proactively planning this for months, but you do need to prove that they intended, in a very legal sense, to aid, comfort, or otherwise support the actual insurrection. It is a high bar, but there's a lot of evidence that is being built up for that bar. Now, when do these conspiracies begin? I'll tell you, the committee's evidence makes a strong case that they long predate the January 6th period or the couple days run-up or even the announcement of a January 6th rally. That's bad for Trump, again, if it shows a long-standing plot by hook or by crook or with a team of crooks to steal the election. This is also different than the public understanding. Remember the morning of January 6th, 2021. Outside of Trump's circle, people didn't view that day as the dangerous culmination of a looming criminal plot. Intelligence services largely didn't. The Capitol Police obviously did not. The National Guard, in the main, didn't view it that way. Even Trump's most ardent critics didn't wake up that day bracing for the nature of the very sophisticated and effective attack that did delay the certification because of the reasons I just told you that this report documents in far more voluminous detail than we had. This stuff was secret. Even at the end of that terrible day, people didn't know what's in the new report, now revealed that the plots extended after the attack. Trump tried to join the crime in progress, kept his motorcade on hand in case he couldn't go later. And that's, again, according to his own staff and protectors. His driver and a Secret Service agent testifying under oath that within 30 seconds of getting to the vehicle after the Ellipse speech, the president asked if he could go to the Capitol. And remember, presidents are ordering people when they tell subordinates what they want. The motorcade didn't even disband on arriving at the White House as usual, the report noting instead the motorcade was instructed to stand by in case the move to the Capitol happened. So, in plain English, Trump tried to join the crime in progress, broke protocol to keep the option open because he still wanted to go back to the literal crime scene. And then if that wasn't enough, after the attack and the violence, the report details that while Trump watched the carnage on TV at the White House and then finally was pushed into telling the rioters to go home, he and Giuliani continued to seek to delay the joint session of Congress. I told you I had highlights for you. That's a huge one. Think about that. Donald Trump and his lead election attorney were still trying to enact one of the planks of the coup plot to delay and sabotage the certification, to create the kind of chaos that they thought could help them hold on to power after the attack. continuing the plot after the violent attack is some of the hardest evidence available that the attack was part of the plot. Now, I said that in a legal way. Here's a different way to say it. If you go to do something and it gets out of hand, right? You go to drive to the supermarket, but you hit someone in the car by accident, and the prosecutors are looking at that and saying, did you murder someone with your car? Did you have an accident? What you do after the accident can be very compelling for the evidence. Do you call the authorities? Do you administer help? Are you worried about this because it wasn't your goal? Or conversely, do you continue to do the thing that makes it look like that accident wasn't an accident, that you intended to harm someone? For example, you got back in your car and tried to hit someone again. They were continuing to try to sabotage the certification after the day of the 6th. That's in the report, and that's one of the crimes that's recommended for referral. All of this unseen and unknown to the general public, the committee emphasizes, and that element of surprise was key because the report notes it might have worked. If enough state officials had gone along, it might have worked. You see it right there. That was the coup plan. Steal the election, even potentially without a physical attack. So the Trump team did think they had to have some level of extreme action, whether you call that rushing the Capitol or threatening Mike Pence, which the president, of course, did in public, or surrounding it in a way to obstruct or delay the certification. That itself, again, is a crime, even if you don't charge them on insurrection. Now, if you're thinking that these other, say, nonviolent crimes or bloodless coup parts are not what's gotten the most attention, and if that sounds so important, why haven't we heard more about it? Again, that's partly by design. That's why I think the committee did a good job in the report of laying out the stuff that's not quite as headline grabbing. Why haven't we heard more about this? Well, here's why.
Welcome to Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
The first rule of Coup Club is you don't talk about it, like any secret endeavor that could fall apart even if just exposed. The report shows that Trump's plan to go to the Capitol, which I've emphasized to you tonight in the quotes I've read, it had to stay secret because it wasn't just a plan to show up at the Capitol. Again, if the plan was just to show up, wave, give one more speech, and then walk away, why would that need to be a secret? No. What is compelling about this, what makes it look guilty, is that it was not just legal. It was a secret plan to advance a criminal plot. And then to fake a contested election, try to force it to the House vote, as we've explained, that mishugas, to use a legal term of art. Now, the report shows Coup Club kept the endgame secret. Most Trump fans who risked it all to storm the Capitol did not know about the nature of the way they wanted to stage a contested election or use voter fraud and elector fraud to claim it was contested and then try to have a House vote. So the committee refers these folks for indictment on the idea that if there are no consequences for the people on your screen, whether they were president or not, whether they were in the DOJ or not, like Mr. Clark, whether they're lawyers or not, like Mr. Eastman and Giuliani, whatever they once were, they are citizens today. They are human beings in our society. And if they don't face any consequences whatsoever, none of them, then Team Coup might learn the lesson that, sure, there were some consequences. I don't want to minimize them because those prosecutions are real. We've reported on them. The sedition trial is a big deal. But what I am telling you here is the bloodless part of the coup, if they learn that maybe that's not a big deal because this time it failed, but nobody on that screen went to jail, then that risks turning the failed coup into a practice session. The committee is finishing its work with this exhaustive, meticulous pile of evidence and handing it to the Attorney General. Literally, the DOJ has started taking in these files, and we know they asked for them. And the committee is basically saying to Attorney General Garland, don't you see what's here? Yes, Lady Justice is supposed to be blind, as I've told you, because she personifies a kind of a judge, weighing the evidence on the scale without fear or favor of the people involved. But Merrick Garland is supposed to be able to see, to lead the prosecutors who get the factual evidence and put it on that actual scale. And you have to see the facts to do that. If you can't see some of these facts I've just shared, plus the other 800-plus pages, if you can't see that in the light of day, then there won't be any time where the proverbial Lady Justice is judging the plotters. And that's the thing. We talk about the rule of law. We talk about independence. We talk about how long it takes to develop these kind of cases. But there is a big, big difference between being thoughtful and being patient and ignoring what appears to be emerging, which is, and I'll say it clearly as we start the year, a disturbing double standard in Merrick Garland's Justice Department, where the lawyers and the connected and the powerful and the people who worked at DOJ, oh, how funny, they all work together, are somehow being held to a different, lower standard, being coddled legally than the people who rushed the Capitol. I don't say that with any book of business for whether you indict Donald Trump or not. There may be reasons, legal, prudential, and otherwise, why going that line is too difficult, and good faith, nonpartisan prosecutors don't do it. Take the former president out and look at that other list of lawyers and ask yourself, why is it so hard for the DOJ to indict lawyers? Is there bias at play? Is there a lack of independence? Is there fear? These are tough questions, especially for people who want to assume the best. But we're not doing assumptions here. We're doing reporting. And the legal reporting bears out a crime spree that is being charged in different ways for different people. I can't prove to you why, but I can show you the receipts. Hey, I'm Ari Melber. Thanks for watching The Beat. I wanted to let you know I'm writing a foreword to the January 6th committee's full report, which is coming out soon from HarperCollins. You can go pre-order the book right now, and it'll come to you first when the report comes out in the fall or whenever the government releases it. Just search Melber Jan 6 on Amazon or your favorite independent book site and click pre-order. You'll be the first to get both the report and my new piece on the coup conspiracy. You can also go to melberbook.com and order it there.